Florida State versus Miami is one of the most historic and bitter rivalries in college football, but in recent years, the two teams haven't been good at the same time. Are we finally getting back to that?
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers, and thank you so much for making Locked On Canes and Locked On Seminoles your first listen and your first watch today. It's an epic crossover episode. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. We got the man Brian Smith, not only from Locked On the Portal, but from Locked On Seminoles as well. Today's episode is proudly brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And on this crossover episode, we'll talk 2026 recruiting, where Miami and Florida State both stand in that regard, possible conference realignment, because getting out of the ACC is going to be fiscally a lot more achievable in a few years than we originally thought, strengths and weaknesses on the Hurricanes and Seminoles, and whether or not their matchup this year is going to be an epic one. But Brian, let's start on the coaching side and on the personnel side. A ton of new transfers for both of the teams we cover, and a lot of new coaches, both sides of the football, Brian, for Florida State.
Yeah, I thought that Florida State was in a pretty awkward spot because of the contract they had with Norvell. But if you're going to do a staff shakeup, they did a really good one overall, especially defensively. Coach White from Nebraska, I mean, his first year there, they had the number 9 run defense in the country. No offense to Nebraska, but they don't get the same kind of kids that Florida State and Miami do on a consistent basis. So I'm curious to see what he can do. And they still have Surtain in the secondary and all that. But of course, the biggest question is, how well does Malzahn mesh with Norvell? And that is my biggest concern, because at the end of the day, there's one play caller. How's that going to go? Got Thomas Castellanos coming in. He's a guy that played for Gus for a year at UCF, and a plethora of guys coming over. So it is a strange time in Florida State, especially after a 2-10 season, because we didn't get to see much or hear much from spring. They really kept it close. It was almost Mario-like, to be honest with you, and because Mario hates dealing with the media during spring, but it is what it is. So we'll find out, because the schedule doesn't break in slowly. Alabama comes to town, so Notre Dame goes to Miami. So both of them you're going to find out real quick with all these portal additions. Did it work or not? Because otherwise you get your butt kicked.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of two minds with it, because on the one hand, like from a football point of view, it's kind of nice to have like a warm-up game, like give me a FAMU for the opener. But then at the same time, that opening weekend in college football is such a big showcase opportunity. So, for Miami to play Notre Dame, for Florida State to host Bama, I think it's a good opportunity for both programs. From a Miami side, Brian, they did keep continuity on the offensive side of the football, which makes sense after you had the number 1 offense in the country last year. I know that had a lot to do with Cam Ward, of course, who's no longer with the program. He's the number 1 overall pick to the Tennessee Titans. But Shannon Dawson, Miami's OC, and his staff are getting the opportunity to run it back and to keep that continuity on that side of the ball. I think that's important. But on the flip side, on defense, it is almost completely different. There is one holdover in the entire defensive coaching staff, and it's Pro Football Hall of Famer Jason Taylor, who, is a really good recruiter. And, the players seem to enjoy being coached by him. We'll kind of see. This will only be his second year as a defensive line coach, so we'll see how the development continues to go for JT's side of the football. But new coordinator, new position coach at every other spot. And I thought Miami made a good move on the defensive side, going and grabbing Corey Heatherman, who was the DC at Minnesota last year. I'm sure that kind of the in that Cristobal had with Heatherman is their common relationship with Greg Schiano, who Mario Cristobal has worked with and knows very well. And Heatherman up until 2 years ago, was the linebackers coach at Rutgers under Schiano. But then last year, 2024, Heatherman goes out to Minnesota, and he improves their defense from 69th in the country in total D to number 5 in the country. Like, that was as quick of a transformation as you're going to see. And that caught Cristobal's attention, because last year, Lance Guidry's defense was completely disorganized, ineffective. The communication was bad. There were too many stunts and twists up front, which I think had a domino effect on the entire unit last year. So, Corey Heatherman is going to bring a much more direct approach and an instinctive approach to rushing opposing passers and really emphasize turnover creation and chaos creation. And so far, he, of course, worked with the defense through the entirety of spring. They seem to like Coach Heatherman a lot. He also coaches the linebackers. And so, it's hard to imagine Miami's defense isn't better from what it was last year because you set the bar pretty low. Like the same way I think we can all say Florida State is going to win a lot more games this year because they set the bar pretty low with 2-10 last season. I would say Miami's defense can only get better. But what about players, Brian? Because Florida State and Miami both have been really active in recent cycles in the transfer portal. What are some of the biggest spots? I guess we could probably both start with quarterback that Florida State addressed this offseason.
Thomas Castellanos is a kid that I know. He played at Ware County High School in Georgia. It's one of those programs where the town kind of shuts down on a Friday night. So he's used to the spotlight, but he didn't get the starting gig as a sophomore at UCF. So he transferred to BC, had a pretty good year. Then this next year they had O'Brien as the head coach. And I'm like, that's a terrible fit for him. Didn't work out. He leaves the team and he comes to Florida State. From what we have heard is that he's been a leader in all that stuff, but he was up and down during spring as they had guys in and out of the lineup at the receiver position. They had a lot of guys banged up. And then, of course, they had 3 guys transfer out at receiver. So that's a lot of stuff going on. And I'm concerned about the continuity because you just need a bazillion reps with your receivers. And they're all new pretty much. You got a bunch of young guys. So I think he's a great fit for their offense, but I'm not sure it'll be consistent. Offensive line, 4 guys from the transfer portal are expected to start. They're good players. They all started where they were. Micah Pettis was banged up during spring. He's the 350-pound offensive tackle from Ole Miss. But that's a guy they needed because Gus wants to run the ball downhill, wants to play power football, and they have to be able to do that to set up the downfield play action shots. And Castellanos has got the arm to do it. He's got a cannon. But their best guy might be the center, Luke Pettibone. He came over from Wake Forest. He's a starting center. And they just got to be more organized. Last year, it was just embarrassing to watch. Going back through film, I remember throwing things and saying things I can't repeat on this podcast as I watch some of their rewinds. It is just embarrassing to watch. But he's a very good player, and he's a veteran. He should be able to help them. Defensively, they got a lot of guys, too. D-line, they really hit. But maybe the guy that's most important is James Williams, who came over with Coach White from Nebraska. Pass rusher, 6'4", 6'5". He's about 260 now. He's very happy. It's going to be a stand-up end or a strong side end, maybe a little of both. He's key because they don't have a ton of pure pass rushers. And then they also have some guys coming over like Stephon Thompson. He's a guy, again, from Nebraska, knows the scheme. It's totally different. And I mean totally different than what they ran. Going to be more zone. And they're also going to use a little bit more of a 3-safety look. So it's the back end is going to be a lot different. I just hope they're on the right page. And after last year, it's kind of hard to imagine, even though it is a new system, that they won't be. So we'll see how that goes, but they got a bunch of new guys coming in, and I'm just curious as much as anything else, Alex.
Yeah, Miami has a bunch of new guys coming in as well, and including the quarterback change. I mean, you go from Cam Ward and, Miami, and I think rightfully so, did not feel comfortable enough from what they already had in the quarterback room for someone to take over as the starter. So they went out and they got Carson Beck from Georgia, who was one of the biggest names available, 24-3 record as a starting quarterback at UGA. Now, the big, issue and question with Beck has just been his recovery because he was not available for the entirety of spring football, at least not fully available. I mean, he was out there running and working and taking mental reps, but he wasn't cleared to throw coming off of elbow surgery. He has since been cleared for the past several weeks. He's been able to throw and work out. So he's kind of catching up during the offseason workouts, trying to build timing with his receivers and trying to get that arm kind of back to the 2024 or even 2023 form that he was in prior to the injury. So kind of getting him caught up is a big question. I think Beck is very capable once he's available, but we're not going to really see what he can do until summer practices start, fall camp, you would call it. Other big additions for the Hurricanes outside of quarterback, I think safety Zechariah Poyser from Jacksonville State, who was around for spring, looks to me like he's going to be a star. Safety room was among Miami's biggest weaknesses last year. They weren't really prepared after losing Cam Kinchins and James Williams from the year before. Poyser looks like someone who can absolutely play. Miami did bring in multiple receiver transfers, including the guy who's the 6-year senior, CJ Daniels from LSU, who I think is an important addition because his leadership is something that's really shining. Like, he gets guys together for separate meetings. He organizes workouts. I mean, CJ Daniels kind of has that quarterback leadership type mentality, which I appreciate, and he's a productive player. You know, you mentioned Florida State bringing in a new center. So did Miami, James Brockermeyer from TCU. Based on how I saw him practicing, I think he might even be a little bit better than Zach Carpenter, who Miami had last year at center. Cornerback Xavier Lucas was a big time addition from Wisconsin. You know, a lot of controversy as to how he even ended up at Miami, but that young man can play. Over 200 pounds, big physical cornerback. And I also I like the addition of Mohamed Toure, the linebacker from Rutgers that Miami added. He played with Corey Heatherman there a couple of years ago. Toure is coming off of an ACL injury. He's fully healthy, but he missed the entire 2024 season. So kind of getting him back up to game speed and you know, shaking off the rust, I think is going to be the question there. When we come back, let's talk about strengths of Miami's roster and Florida State's roster, and let's talk about possible weaknesses. And also, do we think it's going to be a close competitive game come October 4th when Miami heads to Tallahassee to take on the Seminoles? You want to keep it locked right here on this epic crossover event, this brand new episode of Locked On Canes and Locked On Seminoles. We already know you're keeping it locked to FanDuel. Folks, the NBA playoffs are in full swing, and they've been awesome. Every night delivers high quality and highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action than right now. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Guys, live betting is a game changer because sometimes you may be unclear which way you're leaning before tip-off. Then you get a few minutes into the game, the odds are always updating live, and you can place your bets at FanDuel. Whether you're an experienced sports bettor or a novice, it's so user-friendly, and they make it so easy to get in on the action. And guys, there's no better time than right now to sign up if you're new to FanDuel. Head to FanDuel.com. Place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you for making us your first listen and your first watch today. For your next listen, if you're a Locked On Canes regular, I'm telling you, want to check out what Brian is doing over at Locked On Seminoles, scout the enemy, and vice versa. If you're Locked On Seminoles, you probably hate me, but check it out. If you want to scout what Miami is up to, check out Locked On Canes. Our shows are available free wherever you get your podcasts and available free on YouTube. All right, Brian, let's start with the positive before we get into the question marks. What area would you say is the biggest strength of the Florida State Seminoles roster heading into this 2025 season?
I would go with defensive line because I know they kind of put it in an odd way, but they said their biggest portal addition was keeping Daryl Jackson from going to the draft. That's obviously he wasn't in the portal, but you can't teach 6'6", 330 and athletic. I mean, that's just the way it goes. And for whatever reason, the light switch went on. I mean, I hammered him last year because he wasn't consistently giving the effort that he needed to. And that's why he didn't turn pro. But this spring, they just lauded his effort, his leadership, his ability to chase the ball across the field, setting an example, not just verbally, but with how he performs. I'm like, where's this been? So guys that are that physically gifted, playing that hard, you're not going to block them very consistently unless you use two guys. And, of course, that opens up everything else. Of course, Miami and Florida State, when they've been great D-tackle at both schools, historically, Cortez Kennedy is one of my all-time favorite college football players. This is an example. Nobody can block him one-on-one. Daryl has that kind of ability, so I think he's the leader there. Then I mentioned James Williams, et cetera. They should be good up front. The secondary should be good, but they did go get somebody out of the portal. There's been a few questions about some injuries, but They got Shaheem Brown back. If it rounds into form, and it should, that should be another good unit. But like running backs got talent too. Those would be the 3 spots that I think should be good. But again, you got so many new coaches, new scheme. I'm hesitant on anything because it's just, how do you pick it up?
Yeah, I mean, for Miami, it's an obvious place to start with the strength. The offensive line should be a Joe Moore Award contender. You know, that award every year that goes to the top overall. Miami should be consistently in that mix as they have been for the past couple of years. This year, they might even win it. CeCe Mauigoa, the right tackle, he's entering the money year for him because he's draft eligible. This is his 3rd year. He started his first 2. One of the better offensive tackles in the country. If things play out well for him, he could even be a first rounder, next April. Inez Cooper at right guard, I think, is someone folks, everybody who actually watches him and scouts him is like, dude, that guy's a mauler, but, maybe playing guard doesn't get as much attention. I mentioned, I thought James Brockermeyer, the addition from TCU at center, I think he's going to be really good. The left side may not be as solid as the right side, but I think they're in good shape with big Markel Bell at 6'9", going to be the full-time starter at left tackle for the entire season this year. Did really well there last year, and probably going to be Matthew McCoy at left guard or Ryan Rodriguez. I think they're pretty good either way, whichever of those guys start. So offensive line, no surprise, Mario Cristobal coach team. I think they're going to be in really good shape there. And that's going to have, an effect, of course, on the running game. I think that's the other area where Miami should be really strong is their running back room. They were already in really good shape before going out and grabbing a transfer because Mark Fletcher heading into his 3rd year, Jordan Lyle, who had an explosive true freshman year last year, heading into his 2nd year. They've got one of the better 1-2 combos in the ACC, and then they went out and added Shamar Brown out of North Dakota State, who was one of the top players in FCS last year. 1,500 yards, 15 touchdowns scored. North Dakota State won a national championship last season. He won the Jerry Rice Award for the top FCS freshman. I think he adds a legitimate 3rd punch to that running back room. So, running back room, offensive line, and I think a sneaky strength this year could be tight end. Miami lost a lot from last year, but Elijah Lofton, who's going to be the featured tight end this year, a player I know you covered coming out of high school at Bishop Gorman. I think he's going to end up being, I think, one of the rising stars in the ACC this year. So those are probably the spots I would put. And you notice they're all on the offensive side of the ball, but those are the spots I probably put as the biggest strengths for Miami. What about Brian for Florida State? Question marks or weaknesses if you think, certain units may be outright bad?
Look, the wide receiver situation is weird. They get Deuce Robinson from Southern Cal. He's a kid I know, 6'5", 6'6", 220. He's the real deal. Great. But if you don't have other guys around him that are consistent and healthy, that you just double team the best player. It's not that big of a deal. You just do that. They get Squirrel White from Tennessee, but Tennessee wasn't that concerned about him leaving, from what I was told. That's not what I expected, but he's not a burner. He's just a really shifty guy that can catch a lot of screens, which does fit Gus's offense. But then they had 3 transfers. Jaylen Brown, a kid that's from Miami, among them. It's just been a weird deal. And they've got a bunch of young guys. They're going to be sophomores, all very talented, but are they ready to take that step forward? Not just running routes, catching passes, but blocking, knowing the right routes, sight adjustments, all that. Because one sight adjustment that you mess up, ball goes the other way, you lose. So I'm very concerned about receiver. I also have my concerns about the linebacker group. It was okay last year, and they've got some good players there. But again, it's a new system, and the linebackers got to set up the scheme. It's kind of like the same deal with Miami. They're in the same boat at linebacker. Got some new players. They've got good new coaches. How do you adjust? We can sit there. We could talk to Mario. We could talk to anybody on Florida State. It doesn't matter. You got to see it there because that's more above the shoulders. So I'm concerned about linebacker. And then again, they had 2-3 guys banged up at safety in the spring, and they're inducing this incredibly different defense. So I'm worried about the secondary too. If they don't figure it out again, they played Bama first game. Kalen DeBoer's offense is a nightmare to schedule first game. And I know they didn't know he was going to be the coach or anything, but it's very complex, and you're putting in a new scheme. It is not the ideal circumstance. So if they have a bad game, I'm concerned that they'll go down mentally. Because, I mean, I expect Bama to beat Florida State. I don't know what you think, but, I mean, it'd be surprising if they did. And they're better. But I'm more worried about not just losing, but like the secondary getting smoked. And then like mentally they go in the tank, and then that's a long season ahead. So secondary, linebacker, and receiver would be my biggest concerns.
Yeah, on the Miami side, I mean, on the one hand, I think every position group has at least a player or two that I feel really good about, but there are certain spots where I have depth concerns. One of those is defensive tackle. Like I think at the top line, because Miami does have former 5-star recruit Justin Scott, who's heading into his second year. So and he looks like he could be ready to take on a big role. He looked really good in spring. Ahmad Moten is a defensive tackle that we really like, had a really good second half of last year. And David Blay, Miami brought in through the transfer portal from Louisiana Tech. He looks like a player, but I think there's a perceived drop-off after the top three guys. And, in this day and age, you like to have probably at least 4, if not 5 defensive tackles that you really trust. So there's got to be certain guys like, Artavius Jones and, certain guys who are tweeners who can kind of play inside or outside, like Armando Blunt and even Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesdor can move inside. Like you're going to have to kind of deputize some depth at defensive tackle this year. So that could be a little bit of a question mark. Question mark at linebacker, certainly, because Miami was pretty thin there. They did add Kamal Bonner from NC State, who's a nice young player. And I mentioned Mohamed Toure, experienced guy from Rutgers, but coming off a really serious injury. And these guys have to mesh. Like they were both added in May, in the latter part of the transfer portal, so they haven't practiced yet in spring. And then, on the defensive secondary, I applaud Mario Cristobal and his staff for how much aggression they attacked those areas with, because the defensive backfield was embarrassing. It was not Miami standard a year ago. So they bring in a ton of guys through the transfer portal, including Poyser, Xavier Lucas, who I mentioned, Jacoby Thomas from Tennessee, Keontae Scott from Houston. But, you're going to have to mesh all these guys together, and some of them were added later on in the process, and it's an entirely new defensive scheme. So I'm going to be skeptical until they answer those questions for me. And on both sides, a lot of questions are going to be answered October 4th when Miami takes on Florida State in Tallahassee. Let's take a very early look at that game when we come back, plus status with 2026 recruiting and possible conference realignment. I mean, for how much longer are Miami and Florida State going to be ACC rivals? You want to keep it locked right here on this Locked On Canes, Locked On Seminoles crossover. Now, I know that this is probably unfair because both teams are going to have, 4 or 5 games played before they meet in early October. But, I mean, I mentioned in recent years, a lot of these games haven't been close, right? When Florida State was really good, Miami was down. Then Miami had a good year last year. Florida State was down. There's been a lot of streaks between these two teams over the past couple of decades. But I don't know. Well, what are you expecting, Brian, October 4th? Do you think it's going to be a really close, competitive game in Tallahassee? And who do you think has the edge?
I mean, Miami's the better team this year until otherwise proven. I'm not going to sit here and go the Homerville route. But at the same time, Doak Campbell is a very difficult place to play. It's newly renovated, by the way. If you want to see some cool photos, They put some up. They did a really nice job. But we don't know what they're going to do. Like, I mentioned DBs as a possible strength and weakness. Like it's so wild. Like it's literally the talent is there, but like brand new scheme, completely different. And you start with Bama, that makes me nervous. And if you're not ready in the secondary against what I think by that point will be a pretty good receiver group for the Canes early on, like playing Notre Dame game 1, I don't like that very much, but every game you're going to have something you have to adjust to. It's college football. I'm just curious if Florida State by then has any chemistry on defense, because you've got a veteran quarterback for Miami. You've got a ridiculous offensive line and running back group. You could argue their O-line running back group's as good as any in the country. It's a combination. If I'm not right about Florida State's D-line, Miami should win that game by double digits. If Florida State plays well up front and at least forces Carson Beck into 3rd and 5 and 3rd and 6s, you got a chance. Gus will have some plays saved. He'll lie about this. Oh, we don't save plays for the baloney. Everybody saved plays for the rivals. You don't think he did that when he was at Auburn, saving plays for Alabama? Come on. So they'll have some trick plays and different things, and they'll keep it close. But Miami's the better team. I think right now, if I had to pick, I'll go with the Canes, something like 27-21. I think it'll be a good game. It'll be a slugfest because both teams have gotten better in the trenches on both sides. And I think that the coaching staffs, especially on defense for both teams, got way better. So I'm not saying it's going to be a barn burner circa 1992 or 93 or something like that, but I think it'll be a very good football game.
I think you summed it up well. I don't have a whole lot to add. I mean, I'm looking forward to seeing, like you said, Miami's offensive line versus Florida State's defensive line. I think the trench battles are going to be big. When Miami's on defense, sometimes Miami historically struggles against, dynamic dual threat quarterbacks like Castellanos. So does he go out there and have like the career type of day against Miami? We've seen that happen before, but again, Miami's defense could be completely different from last year. So we'll have yet to find that out. A huge topic, Brian, especially on the Florida State side, because Miami didn't sue anybody, and a lot of Hurricanes fans wish they had. Miami has not been nearly as vocal about trying to get out of the ACC. The ACC recently settled their lawsuits with Florida State and Clemson, and a big part of that is, in a few years' time, it's not going to cost a whole lot to get out of the ACC. I mean, what are you hearing from the Florida State side? Are there talks about joining one of the Power 2 conferences in the near future?
Well, it depends on who you speak with. If the OG in this industry is probably WarChan, ironically, the website that's been around since somewhere 97, something like that. And of course, Gene Williams has made $1 billion on that, and they've done a great job. He's as well connected as anybody to a school as there is in this industry, period. And he thinks that after the 26th season, Florida State might be gone. I don't have those kind of contacts. Now, that would still, I'm trying to remember, it's 160 or something like that they'd have to pay, but it's a heck of a lot better than 300, 400. Those are just not happening numbers. It's just not. Yeah. And I don't know where they would get it because Florida State just spent all this money on Doak, et cetera. I don't know how that would work, but each year it goes down 15, 25 million. By 2030, Florida State's gone at the latest, but if Gene's saying that, he even had a podcast on it, Gene knows something. Like he's talking, I'm not saying he's sitting in Norvell's office, but he might as well be. He's probably as connected as it gets. So I'm curious what Miami's going to do with that because the ACC is good. If Florida State and Clemson leave, the ACC football is done. Miami would win the league at least every other year, be them or SMU probably. And they wouldn't get any respect for it, like none. And it wouldn't even be their fault. So, and how would that impact Florida State playing Miami? There's all kinds of questions that goes into that. My guess is Big Ten. There's a lot of bad blood with Florida State in the SEC back from the 90s when Bowden was there. Yeah. They picked the ACC instead of the SEC then. But Big Ten also wants to get their footprint in the state of Florida, as you're well aware.
I mean, it seems like it would be difficult for either Miami or Florida State to get into the SEC because I keep hearing so much about how, and obviously, sometimes this stuff happens anyway because I know Texas A&M was dead set against Texas joining the SEC. They still forced it on them, but I always hear that, Florida wants to keep that SEC hold in the state. And, South Carolina doesn't want Clemson in the SEC, and that the SEC might say, hey, we already have footprints in both of those states. We don't really need to add there. Whereas the Big Ten, they want to be the nationwide conference. They went out into the West Coast and California and Oregon. Maybe they want to go all the way to the East Coast. So, yeah, I mean, it seems more likely that the Big Ten would be interested in adding a Florida State and or Miami. Maybe you want to add both so it's easy to keep that rivalry intact. But I mean, I'd be cool from a Miami standpoint. I would be cool either way. I know our guy Drake Toll keeps trying to make Miami to the Big 12 happen. I don't think that's going to happen. But like you said, I mean, if it comes down to staying in a depleted ACC, if the ACC is no longer considered like a power conference at that point, do they still have any bargaining power for automatic bids into the college football playoff? If not, you want to get the heck out of there. So. But that's very interesting. The idea that Florida State might, within like a year or two, might be out of the ACC. That would be compelling.
Talk to Gene. Like I said, he knows the landscape better than I. So I was like, oh,
Yeah,
that's intriguing. So we'll see.
I'll direct my questions to Gene. All right. So how 2026 recruiting? But right now Miami has. I think that we both got top 25 classes. It's very early, of course. Signing day is not till December. Florida State, I think, is in the low 20s now. Miami at number 10. Of course, for Miami, the headline maker was Jackson Cantwell, 5-star offensive tackle out of Nixa, Missouri. It was really shocking because up until the final couple of hours before his announcement, everyone, including me, I thought he was going to Georgia. Like I thought he was going to UGA till a few hours. Something leaked, and we realized he was going to pick Miami. Offensive tackle, surprise, because Cristobal and Mirabal are great at recruiting that position group. Has been the big impact spot for Miami so far. What about Florida State, Brian? 2026 recruiting, how's it going so far, and how's it trending?
They've got 9 commits. They've got some good players. There's 2 concerns that I have, and both are from the same reason. 2 and 10. Several of the kids that are committed are going to take visits elsewhere. I even saw the other day Notre Dame offered one of Florida State's commitments, a long-time commitment, and it's like it's probably not great in that regard. And out of the official visit list, it's really good. Like they've got 15 offensive linemen coming in. That's their biggest need. Obviously, they got to get away from taking portal kids on the offensive line. But are you going to be able to knock it out? So like Eric Thomas played for Florida State from 95 to 99. His kid, Aaron Thomas, is a big-time offensive tackle, but he's not even favoring Florida State. He's going to visit, but that's concerning. Can they get the linemen they need is the first question. They've got a bunch of really good defensive linemen coming in too. James Johnson and a bunch of other players. I need to see not just the 3-star kids, but the 4 and 5-star kids pick Florida State. I need to see it to believe it can. Again, the official visit list each weekend is good. And they even lost Cameron Brooks. I've talked about this on my podcast. I had that full segment rant. Cal got a kid from 30 minutes from Tallahassee. Cal. Donno, come on, Cal.
That's not good.
No, and he's a defensive lineman, a kid I've been scouting since he was a sophomore. Like, we knew. Everybody knew this is a dude. And I was told Cal recruited him harder than Florida State. Really? So I still have to see it. And the new staff, it's not their fault. I mean, this had been set before they got there, but they're in a hole. And you don't have as much time to build relationships. So they've got a monumental task ahead of them, but they did get a really good official visit list. Players across the country. They even got kids from St. John Bosco coming in. So in LA, I need to see it, but there's a chance for a top 12 class. But part of that's going to be also, they got to show way better product on the field this next fall.
Yeah, I think the biggest need, because I look at who Miami has committed class of 2026. They've got 10 verbal commitments, mostly 4-star players with the 5-star of Cantwell. But I don't see any receivers committed yet. I know that that's an area that Coach Kevin Beard really wants to emphasize. Players like Calvin Russell, who Miami is battling with Syracuse and some others for. But you talk about can you imagine Calvin Russell, who's a South Florida kid, Miami Northwestern? You don't want to let him go to Syracuse, New York. That would be not a good thing. Jason Lopez, who could be the next Xavier Restrepo, plays at Chaminade, is someone that Miami wants for their receiver group. So that's an area. And Miami's landed some good receivers in recent years, but then we talk a lot about the misses, right? I mean, losing Jeremiah Smith a couple cycles ago to Ohio State is one that's going to haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. So that's the big area Miami needs to emphasize. I want to thank everyone for making this crossover episode, Locked On Canes and Locked On Seminoles, your first listen. And also check out Brian Smith on the Portal Pod. It's one of the newest shows on this network. Does a fantastic job talking all things. I mean, transfer portal. There still are some players unsigned, talking all things recruiting and NIL, all the stuff that Kirby Smart hates. Brian Smith breaks it down in great detail on the Portal Pod. You can also check me out on Locked On ACC. I know Florida State fans don't really like the ACC, but if you want to hear what's going on in the conference, check me and Kenton Gibbs out and on Locked On Canes as well. And we'll talk to you next time on another episode right here on the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.